Beast here from House of Hengist Comics. Welcome back to the channel, Beans, Beanettes, and of course Beansters. Today it is episode 23, Blitzkrieg the Farm. First, the news, and as we look at this Wild West, this great Western campaign, we can see nothing but confusion, bedlam, terror, and all sorts of problems. And this is a huge component part of this campaign. It is the sheer terror and onslaught of it, the remorseless nature that it is pressed at, the speed, the intensity, and of course for the Germans, they've just got to keep going, driving on literally fumes, amphetamines, and sheer dogged determination. So if we return to the map, let's take one more look at our probing area, and we are at Achtung and Halen. There are two more games to follow in this sort of New Year's special, and we're going to be at the farm today. But first, let's take a big look at the Belgian forces. These were the forces that extricated themselves from the bridge. They pulled out. They are conscripts consisting of 2 infantry platoons of machine guns and mortars. And goodness knows whether we'll see air support. I must have said this about 5 or 6 times. They've never appeared in the deck, but just maybe we may see them today. All basically confident conscript versus the German forces. Now, as I will get into this later, the Germans have basically had to split their forces from the last action and now decided what they're going to take forward. And they've made a decision to take infantry, basically supported by 2 75mm Geb guns and some possible reserves, not from deep reserve, but the primary reserves that they've actually allocated. And these will be, of course, the good old Panzer I SDKFZ 101. Okay, let's now look at the research and the set for this particular action. As I said, there are 2 games that are coming up. The first we're doing in this episode is the farmhouse, and then we're going to be doing Halen, which is here. She's just had a Stuka attack, many buildings on fire. But as we return to the farmhouse, we can see this is the approach road in which the conscripts are moving back towards, and they've got to hold up and stop for 12 turns the German onslaught. So it's a very tough sort of ask. I only had to paint one thing, and I did a fantastic WC 1940s style. So let's get into the mission now and be a little bit more precise, because it does hinge on the allocations from the first battle. This is the farmhouse, as we've said, and what we can see here is the Force A, which is being allocated to Halen, which is on fire, and this will be the combat group here, the Kampf group, which will be attacking 2 infantry platoons, 2 Geb guns, and 3 armoured cars. So one of these platoons has been placed into the reserve pool along with the Panzer I tanks. In deep reserve, we've got Panzerjägers, Panzer IV and Pioneers, but they will be allocated to the next game. So without further ado, we're going to be using ACHTUNG Panzer with a heavy deck, and there will be videos coming up on how we play this. But let's now get into the battle action, guys. It's another fine morning here in Belgium, but as we can see, the Belgians are hastily running for the farmhouse, and they're going to try and dig in and hold this position for as long as possible. They've got to really stick it out for about 3 hours and prevent the Germans penetrating this, because this is the hinge on the flank. And as the Germans move up, mainly in trucks, as we can see, in the van are their 3 armoured cars, the Belgians basically are scurrying into the corn when suddenly we get a Stuka attack. Yet again, Stukas, as she dives down and basically comes right over the mortars and the infantry. She does do damage. She causes a major pin, and the horns of Jericho rolls fail, so they're double pinned by that, and the Stukas leave. This places the Belgians in a difficult position, but they unpin and move forward to try and engage the enemy. This was a rather unusual move and wasn't expected by the Germans, and the Belgians basically then proceed to open fire on the column that's coming up the road. The armoured cars basically have moved off the road. They didn't start aggressively, but they return fire and destroy 4 men, basically with 20mm. They also forced the Germans to dismount and get into those trees, thereby delaying them for the first turn already, which is a really good start. But the armoured cars move round and flank and begin to open fire remorselessly on those troops on the edge of the corn, whilst their infantry proceed to move up. But their mortars come in, and then a card is played against heavy machine guns in the building. That fails, as we saw with a 6. The Germans try and cross the road, are hit by Overwatch. It's not effective and manage to scamper across. The Belgians again basically dig in, go to ground and wait wherever they can. They know an onslaught's coming. The Overwatch, as I said, fails. No casualties caused by that. The Germans now, their second platoon arrives and they start to move up over the bank. The Geb starts to direct fire. It's using its observer in the forward. The Belgians now begin to fall back. They've delayed them for a couple of turns now, lost about 8 men. It was well worth it. But the German first platoon has been really damaged in basically close arms fire. We then get sharpshooter. Now this was critical because there was an assault being made, so the Belgians picked the lead team and it failed its save, thereby preventing the assault. It was too ineffective. Basically the shooting was far too effective. However, the mortars and infantry recoil. Mortars now land basically on the Germans, and that German platoon is already at nearly half its strength. The heavy machine guns are rat-a-tatting out of the windows, and the German one I see looks very, very nervous about the casualties that he's taking. He moves his second platoon out into the open. He's fearful of the machine guns, but his knee mortar uses smoke on the spot are a really good call, and basically his Gebs begin to concentrate and open fire as well, as we can see here, pinning, always trying to pin down and then suppress. That's the sequence really. So if a team is basically, or a platoon is suppressed, it cannot fire. So it's a really excellent way of basically manoeuvring, and you can get forward in these conditions when the teams are suppressed. However, the Belgians, with their heavy machine guns, continue to cause a lot of problems for the Germans. And they start moving some of theirs, including their heavy machine gun team, forward to support the left flank. Their mortars are firing effectively. The German second platoon is taking lots of casualties too, caught in that open. And what we now see is basically the Germans moving up with that first platoon. Their armour, which is the first... the Panzer Is which have arrived, their second reserve, they begin to support the infantry, and they really were needed as artillery ranges in on the heavy machine gun that's moved forward to cover the left flank. We also see the Belgians now begin to launch an assault. Because the Germans are depleted, they move forward in that corn and start firing, but they don't get any casualties. The Germans basically return fire and inflict quite a few. About 8 men are horsed to combat. And what we now see is basically them close with the assault. They're not pinned, but they lose their commander. And then they try and play carry-on corporal, which would give them a mission tactics, swap the command, but it's jokered. And they are compelled to withdraw. And the Germans are very close to breaking through onto the mortars. Their Gebs are firing again onto the farmhouse and trying to suppress that second platoon. But Belgian first platoon can't take it and break. And with them, the one I see, the mortars fall back, effectively acting as a rifle line now, as the Germans, even with only about 20 men, press forward, but they've got that corn effectively cleared. The heavy machine gun that moved out onto the road is killed. Heavy mortar fire and Geb fire, continues on the building. And the Germans now have such weight of fire basically against that building. It is absolutely being decimated. The only real effective infantry they have, though, is first and second platoon, but both are heavily depleted. And they start to move in to try and clear that farmhouse. And the Panzer Is that have move up in support. They're doing a good job. What we now see is the Germans make an assault. They've effectively pinned down, not suppressed, the Belgians, who counter-attack, and we get a huge melee which goes on in these buildings, back and forth. It is very, very bloody, and the Belgians just keep motivating, and they produce an incredible defense of the farmhouse, especially in these sort of sties and these other little walled areas. And this fight goes on until the one I see has been captured, and they retreat back into the buildings. We now see concealed fire played by the Belgians, excellently used. The Joker's gone, they open fire, and they get a devastating salvo, basically, of rounds which hit the first Panzer one. It fails its save, it is effectively blown up through firepower. The second takes damage, the damage is fire, it fails its save, that catches fire, but it doesn't break. As we see the Germans now really worried, but moving forward, still putting the pressure onto this farmhouse complex. And casualties are mounting on the Belgians, but they haven't broken yet. And what we now see is that the mortars decide to pull out. They can't hold that flank alone, and they don't count towards platoon morale, company morale if they break. We now get at last an event. Alas, not good. Cowardice is then played on the Germans. They basically, it isn't failed by the Belgians. They then launch an assault with first platoon basically in. It's on a very depleted state. They go in, shooting as they go. Their Gebs fail to range in this time and miss. And there's a fight again. It's very brief, but this time the Belgians can't really hold their ground in that farmhouse and break out of it. They've been very heavily depleted in the two assaults that have taken place, and effectively the Germans get in, but they decide they're not going to just stay there. They're going to break out as the Belgian second platoon breaks. And as they're running, the second platoon, really well led, with only like 9 men, charge in, take the farmhouse, and then break out towards the other part of the farm, the main building, so to speak. And here they're going to make an assault, and they race across to the wall. They assault the AA machine guns, who are pinned down, as you can see, and the heavy machine gun was pinned down by Geb fire. We've got basically support fire from 20 mils and the twin turreted Panzer ones, and they break in there. It's a remarkable fight against huge odds. That, you know, one casualty and they would be in real trouble, but they take the position, and with taking that position, they've driven the residue of the Belgians out, and effectively the Belgians HMG platoon breaks. That leaves the 1IC is liberated by the first platoon commander, and the Germans move on. But it is turn 12, gentlemen. They didn't quite secure it in the last moment, and following discussions with the Belgians breaking, the Germans put their hand across the table and called it a draw, and rightly so. Well, what can we say in postscript? It was a great game, a small game, but the casualties were so heavy. One of the most brutal battles I've actually witnessed so far. Both sides losing all their infantry to all intents and purposes. A lot of their support weapons, those two Panzer ones being shot out by heavy machine guns. But as a little bit of homework for you guys, I would like to suggest you tune in on YouTube and check these two channels out, the invasion of Belgium and of course the Battle of the Netherlands. Also, a great book if you're doing camouflage and painting is Zaloga's work on BLITZKRIEG. It's really comprehensive. We've got Lloyd Clark's BLITZKRIEG book. That's the go-to for reference, guys. And as the Führer looks on, contemplating what is going on, they're still not quite sure how successful it is. All we've got is Major MacDonald and Simpkins musing back to the good old days. So without further ado, I'd like you to wish you a happy new year. Stay tuned for our next episode. Stay safe. And this is BLITZKRIEG. So in the immortal words of Winston Churchill, I'll leave you with that.